Hello, viewer. Just reminding you that if you have a question, comment, or submission for me or any of my characters, you can send it to chronicler177@gmail.com or post it in the fan mail channel of my Discord to have it answered in my fan mail series. And if you have the time, please leave a comment on this video to let me know what you thought of it. Your feedback is very important to me. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Brotherhood War Aftermath almost didn't happen. The original plan was to go from Brotherhood War straight into Hyborian. Of course, this was back when Brotherhood War hadn't been fully scripted yet and the Lifebringer's saga was still somewhat malleable. But as I got deeper and deeper into writing Brotherhood War and the story began to evolve, I realized that there was going to have to be a bridge between it and its sequel. Otherwise, way too many story threads were going to go unresolved, and the jump from Brotherhood War to Hyborian would be extremely jarring. I'd also been wanting to reason to develop a Tales of the Reach trilogy type of production again, and I realized that the time period after the Lifebringer's takeover contained a wealth of possible story threads to capitalize on. Very quickly, Aftermath began to take shape. If Brotherhood War was a representation of the fires of war, Aftermath is the analogy of when those fires burn out. Brotherhood War saw a time of great change, movement, momentum. In Aftermath, everything is cold, frozen. The war has ended, the fires have died out, everyone is dealing with the fallout from it. The skies are gloomy and cloudy, snowfall is a common theme throughout the story. One might say the snow is analogous to ash blowing through the air after a wildfire. Humanity is held in check, and there really isn't much that anyone can do to change that right now. I jumped ahead 3 months after the Lifebringer's coup for a reason. The frigid winter is a physical representation of this frozen theme, and is augmented by Tom Salta's icy, piano-heavy scores from Spartan Assault and Spartan Strike and Halo Online. Fun fact, the very first image that came into my head for Aftermath appeared as I was listening to the track Stark from Spartan Assault. It was an image of a woman walking through a snow-covered city street amidst a light snowfall. That was the inception of the character Carla, and I knew then that the whole of Aftermath would be centered around this tone. It's obvious that things are not going well post-Brotherhood War, for anyone, except maybe the Lifebringer, but she's got her own conflicts going on. This is another major theme of Aftermath. The whole thing is centered around personal conflicts this time, instead of gigantic battlefields. This does make for a slower-paced story overall, but quite possibly a more interesting one. Most of the conflicts are set up from Brotherhood War, while others are new, such as Carla and Anthony's story thread. Jumping between these threads each episode allowed me to keep the story moving at an engaging pace, while also exploring the post-Brotherhood War environment from different angles. I used the same kind of storytelling in Tales of the Reach trilogy, and it was pretty fun to get to do again. It really sets these kind of productions apart from the rest. Aftermath is designed around 3 main story threads: Zack's thread, Carla's thread, and the Lifebringer's thread, which also intertwines with Silva. The primary story thread that I think everyone was mostly looking forward to was the one revolving around Zack and the gang. Zack was left in a very compromised state of mind after Brotherhood War. He made a split-second decision to save Garrett from the Lifebringer the first time he'd broken out of his indecisiveness. In that moment, Zack showed to his friends and to himself that his loyalties didn't necessarily lie with the UNSC, something that he worried about through Brotherhood War but had never taken action on. Now he's feeling torn apart, as he tells Guardian, ripped between his dedication to his friends and his calling to reconnect with Garrett. He knows what he wants to do, but is struggling to find the courage to do it, because it means alienating himself further from his friends. Logan's not helping things much. You know, this is the first real character development for Logan since his first appearance. He's had his ups and downs, but he's never had this much of a change in character. He's basically the embodiment of the UNSC and the Spartan legacy at this point. From generation to Lifebringer, the UNSC has fought, struggled, and almost failed several times, but never outright lost before. Logan doesn't know what to do in the face of total defeat, so he turns inward, blaming himself and drowning in despair. and then later kind of taking that out on everyone around him. He's also the characterization of military inflexibility and the past generation's resistance to change. He has a heavy, it's us or them mentality. To Logan, you're either UNSC or you're a traitor. There's no middle ground. To him, Zack helping Garrett is absolutely unthinkable. The funny thing is that is almost point for point a mirror of Garrett's stance on the UNSC. They're both so caught up in their adherence to their factions that they don't see that that's what will destroy them. Denver is also very loyal to the UNSC, but not blindly. She can see that they may have to work with the Reformation in order to at least keep the civilian population safe. However, she still harbors distrust for them, enough for her to be worried when Zack wants to run off to them on his own. She still sees the lines between UNSC and Reformation, where Zack insists there are no lines anymore. She's trying to hold on to both being a Marine and being there for Zack, and eventually the two clash. The farewell scene between Zack and Denver was very hard to write. I've tried romantic scenes before, and never quite thought I really did it right. I think this is the closest I've gotten so far. It's got a bit of sappiness, enough for my taste, but not too much. And I think I was able to balance the conflict of their differing interests and their desire to remain together. It's a painful thing to see. Zack and Denver are two very damaged, very alone people who have found a solace of sorts in each other, but their differing loyalties and their interests start to rip them apart from each other. Zack knows he has to go to Garrett, and she knows too, so she lets go of him. And it makes sense. She's been a Marine for probably her whole life. It's natural to think of duty first, relationship second. But if you ask me, it's the wrong choice. It frustrates me when people choose sides over each other, because in the end, we only have each other to count on. So I'm hoping I did that scene justice. I think I did. So I'm hoping that I did better with my romantic scene this time around. I think I did. I think it's a lot better than, say, Reach the Last Wars or like Biker on Threes or something like that, but I don't think I'm there yet. These things are really hard for me to do, but I hope you liked it anyway. Luckily, things get better. Denver realizes just in time that she let go of the wrong thing and goes after Zack. Zack himself manages to finally achieve balance in his loyalties to Garrett and what's left of the UNSC, even being the single factor to tie them together. Garrett and Logan manage to let go of their hatreds enough to find common ground with each other. Without Zack, I doubt either of them would have found a way to work together, and then they'd have been surely doomed, if they're not still already. Things are looking a lot better for the main characters by the end of Aftermath. Logan and Garrett have struck up a truce, and the Brotherhood War is officially over. Zack has taken charge of his own life and found a way to harmonize what was previously splitting him. Denver has decided that losing the favor of the UNSC isn't as bad as losing Zack, and the two, somewhat awkwardly, start a relationship together. Logan reinstates Phoenix Team, which was disbanded after Reach the Last War. I know a lot of Reach the Last War fans are very excited about that, I bet. And as a warm new sun rises on our heroes, perhaps thawing some of that snow and ice, we know that it's not going to be all daisies and roses, but maybe things are looking up now. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for all our characters. Carla's story thread was the largest addition to Aftermath in that it's a totally new story with new characters instead of something being continued on from Brotherhood War. Although it's worth mentioning that Carla and Anthony are the civilians being captured in this scene at the end of Brotherhood War. That scene was actually where we nailed down what Carla and Anthony were going to look like. I just had the actors throw on whatever they wanted, and then I wrote that down, and then we brought it over for Carla and Anthony when we started shooting Aftermath. Anyway, as a part of the multiple story angles thing I was going for, Carla's point of view allowed me to tell the story of the civilian populace being affected by the Lifebringers' takeover. Something I wouldn't have been able to done if I'd skipped Aftermath completely and just gone straight to Hyborian like the original plan was, so I'm really happy that I went back and did that. It's very Half-Life 2 inspired, with Metro cops patrolling the streets, alien architecture cutting into the familiar human structures, and a monotonous voice blaring messages in the sky. I wanted to capture the same feeling of oppression and hopelessness that the early chapters of Half-Life 2 inspires. Like the Combine, the Lifebringer is playing a careful game to make sure that people don't try to rebel. People like Carla are given just enough slack to be able to move around certain sectors of the city between curfews, to collect rations on their own, to talk to each other. There's just enough freedom that they aren't completely crushed, but their small freedoms actually play to the Lifebringer's advantage. Anyone walking around the city streets will see Seattle covered in Centurions patrolled by gunships and sprouting strange alien structures. They can get rations, but those rations are heavily portioned. They aren't jailed, but they are still quartered enough that they're easy pickings for Spartan recruitment raids. They can talk to each other, but everything they have to say is depressing and hopeless, and they spread that and reinforce that by talking to each other about it. This method is probably more effective than trying to completely restrict the entire population of a planet. At least it's working for the Lifebringer. Carla and Anthony are our windows into this totalitarian world. They've been displaced from their home, had everything taken away from them except each other, at least until Anthony is forcibly taken for conscription. I tried to encapsulate the horror Carla would be feeling in that scene, completely helpless to keep her husband from being torn away from her. I think that would be a truly devastating experience. Anthony was the stoic one in their relationship, and after losing him in such a horrible way, any shred of resistance she had against the Lifebringer vanished. She breaks down, becomes complacent, even telling her potential rescuer to go away. She doesn't want to risk going up against the Lifebringer. Exactly what the Lifebringer wanted. You can see just how effective she is at keeping these people suppressed. You know, my whole theme through the Spartan Legacy is hope. And if you crush and crush and crush humanity down, eventually they're going to start pushing back. But by doing what the Lifebringer's doing and just allowing them a bit of their freedoms and still crushing them, but not completely, it keeps them in check for at least a little longer than normal. By the way, Spartan Legacy lore buffs might have picked up on this ODST's last name. Yeah, Adrian Knight is the younger brother of Emily Knight from Omega Halo. Seems he followed in the family tradition. Carla remembers her promise to Anthony and finds it in herself to take action, defying the Lifebringer alongside her neighbor Tom, Corporal Knight, and several other civilians. And they're rewarded for their efforts by being brutally massacred by Fireteam Corsair. Sadly, standing up against the enemy doesn't always mean you win. It may be a more depressing story than I usually have in the Spartan Legacy, but these characters are living in depressing times. I told Carla's story to make the threat of the Lifebringer all the more real, to show that she isn't messing around. Despite her bluff, she is willing to act on her promises in order to make an example of those she is oppressing. Speaking of the Lifebringer, for the first time, we see the Lifebringer in a position where she is not actively hunting the protagonist or planning evil schemes. Well, she's planning something, but she's already won. But that doesn't mean she's done. We get some good introspection via her heart-to-heart with Asaka and her flashback to the trial that imprisoned her. It's clear that as the last surviving Forerunner, she sees it necessary to protect the lesser races from something, and she doesn't trust anyone else to be up to the task. The trial scene shows us exactly how her imprisonment went down, and confirms that she's held this sort of I have to do this and no one else can complex since the Flood War. Maybe watching the galaxy burning around her broke her somehow, and she battled the feeling of helplessness by taking matters into her own hands? She takes the mantle of responsibility very seriously, and it would be noble. The problem is, as Guardian put it, she'll do anything to achieve her ends and has no problem justifying the means. Mix that with her disdain for humanity, and it doesn't look good for us. The Lifebringer just really doesn't like us, probably due to the Human Forerunner War that predated the Flood War, where we got all uppity and massacred a lot of Forerunners. I mean, it's because we were running from the Flood back then, but still, there's a lot of deep-seated hatred here, and I'm sure a lot of Forerunners thought the way the Lifebringer had. It's not an uncommon worldview for them. She and Asaka are really a lot alike. They have good reasons for what they did, but the way they went about it is just horrible. Now, the Lifebringer might be bluffing the UNSC, but that doesn't mean she's messing around. As always, she's willing to do terrible things to reach her goals. She ransacks the civilian population to forcefully turn some of them into more Spartans. She forces Corsair to massacre civilians to keep the population in line, all in the name of safeguarding the galaxy. During the Lifebringer's story thread, we also get to see what's going on inside the head of Silva. I chose Silva over, say, Scott or Hadley for a reason. This story builds on Sylva's strong independent streak, which we saw back in Brotherhood War when she openly questioned the war. Now she's pushing back against the Lifebringer's control, represented by the scenes taking place in the void inside her mind, but ultimately, despite her strong will, she fails to shake off the Lifebringer's control. Really, there isn't any chance she would have anyway. And to her horror, she is forced to brutally kill Carla. It's at that point where Sylva finally surrenders to the Lifebringer's control fully. Sylva's story works in tandem with Carla's to solidify the Lifebringer as a truly genuine, horrifying threat, one that shouldn't be taken lightly, because if the protagonists do take her lightly, this is what could happen to them. And as one of the last enemies we'll ever see in the Spartan Legacy, I'm really hoping I'm doing the Lifebringer justice as a genuine threat. And I hope you think so too. Even though Aftermath was a much smaller production than Brotherhood War, I had a number of technical advances take place, somewhat due to the fact that I upgraded from Premiere CS6 to the current model. The biggest one was that I finally got to make my own green screen effect. It was the scene with Galloway on the holo device in the Lifebringer's office. I made good use of the Chroma Forge item for it. By the way, thank you 343 for including that. Brilliant. I shot Galloway from a couple of angles, knowing in my head how he'd need to be positioned in the scene. Then I superimposed him onto the shot of the office and keyed out the green background. Positioned him on top of the projector, turned down his opacity, added some blur, a little tint, an edge feather, and boom. Easy hologram effect. I think it looks really good. It's nothing as incredible as Showery Dragoon can do. By the way, he made some awesome shots for Aftermath 2, including that special one after the credits. Yeah, we've been planning that for a lot, and to do that, he actually completely designed this underground hangar for that, and he did the lighting and all of that. Really happy with the way it looks. Can't talk about exactly what it is now, but we'll get into that when Hyborian rolls around. Anyway, my little blue screen hologram, my little green screen hologram thing there, it's a small effect, but I'm proud of it. I hope I get to do something like it again in the future now that I know that I can. Also on the visual side, I did a lot more work with color grading around. During the editing process, I noticed that many scenes, particularly the ones in Part 3 that take place during the afternoon, felt a little too warm, a little too bright for the tone of Aftermath. I overlaid a 40 to 50% gray tint on them, and I thought that really helped suck out the warmth of everything, made it feel more in line with the cold feeling of winter, and emphasized the hopelessness of everyone's situation. I also made it so the only real environmental color we see is at the end of Aftermath. The sunrise over the UNSC reformist truce is bursting with colorful purples and oranges, a great breath of fresh air from the impressive grays that dominated Aftermath. The scenes inside Sylva's head were shot on a blank space canvas where the only 4 were invisible blockers. By the way, amazing piece again, thank you 343 for that. They hold up players but let the camera move through them. This allowed me to shoot Sylva and the Lifebringer's imprint from almost any angle, which, combined with the hazy, undefined background and some extra contrast and sharpening effect, helped me give them a very ethereal feeling. For the Lifebringer's trial scene, I wanted to feel very alien and otherworldly, our first glimpse into an age from 100,000 years ago, a civilization completely different from ours. I utilized the most Forerunner-y map in Halo 5 as the set. It has these great big lights with lens flares and all these little spores floating around. I also used a new camera technique, new to me anyway. During that whole trial, the camera never stops moving. It's constantly looking around and changing position. I think that helped give the scene more energy, separated from the rest of the project, where still camera shots are much more prevalent. But I still didn't think that was enough. I wanted to enhance it more, so I added a sharpening layer over it to make the unfamiliar Forerunner angles and architecture pop a bit more, and that satisfied me. I'm very happy with the trial scene. It's my personal favorite in the whole project. I did a whole lot more on the audio side of things. I kept the directional voice audio technique I developed in Brotherhood War, because I thought that really worked. I got a lot of good feedback on that. But unlike in Brotherhood War, where only certain scenes had modified voice effects, I'd guess that over 50% of the lines in Aftermath have some sort of effect on them, from small reverbs in the caves, to the complete reworking of the Spartan voices to make them sound scarier and more hostile. The new Premiere Pro came with several new audio effects too, so I slightly tweaked the Lifebringers and Guardians effects from what they were in Brotherhood War. I think they sound better this way. I also got to play around with the dual layering of the Lifebringer's voice in the Silva's Mind scenes. You might have noticed a more demonic voice underlying the Lifebringer's normal voice, slipping in and out as she talks, punctuating certain words. It's the same voice file as the Lifebringer's, just pitched down a lot and layered underneath her normal lines. I did this to give her a more intimidating, otherworldly presence in Silva's head. I really liked editing the Centurion and Oversight voices, both of which were provided by Tatsumari. They've got a lot of effects layered on them, and in hindsight, I wish I'd given the Centurions more lines. Oversight was obviously heavily inspired by the Combine Overwatch voice from Half-Life 2, a not very subtle nod to one of my favorite sci-fi games. Sean Jacoby came back to do title work for Aftermath, and what he provided topped his work for Brotherhood War, something I didn't think would be possible. The deep black background and flurrying snow perfectly symbolizes the dark, turmoil-filled time Aftermath takes place in, and then the main title completely ices over, which looks really good. Sean also did the credits background, which was the main title background with a slight change. There are light rays, barely peeking through the blackness. A perfect way to symbolize the note of hope Aftermath ends on. On a final note, I was able to find a workaround for one of the bigger problems Halo 5 gave me with Brotherhood War. Remember the twitchy legs bug? Well, a buddy tipped me off that if you use a game type where running speed is slowed down to walking speed, it won't happen as long as actors have their thumbsticks pushed all the way forward. This made shooting scenes where people are just walking around a lot easier to do than it was in Brotherhood War. It worked like a charm. I'll also mention that, aside from the Reach stuff, which was shot before Brotherhood War was even finished, Aftermath was shot completely in the live game camera mode. By not having any huge action scenes, I was able to forego using theater entirely, so that was nice. I hope the Machinima mode game type comes back for Infinite, it's very useful. Most of the main cast of voice actors from Brotherhood War carried over to Aftermath, and they all did spectacular jobs as usual. I don't have anything to say about them that I didn't already say in the looking back for Brotherhood War, with this being such a smaller series with much less screen time for everybody. Instead, I'd rather focus on the newcomers that Aftermath introduced to the Spartan legacy. I held auditions for the role of Carla. I haven't held auditions since Generation, I think. There were a couple good entries, but I ended up giving the role to Floral Ninja-chan, an actress who came at great recommendation from my buddy the Great Isaiah. After running her through her lines, I can see why. She was definitely a great pick for Carla. She managed to balance all sides of the character, the desperate hopelessness, and later the more brave and defiant person she becomes. I was very pleased with her performance, and it's a shame I had to kill her character so quickly. Hopefully I can find another role for her soon. I enlisted a trio of actors I first saw in the Lazy Bunch series Lone Wolves: Andrew Hindle, Javelin 197, and Assassin Glasgow. Assassin was sadly too busy to play more than a small side character, but I still think she performed admirably. Javelin took on the role of Corporal Knight, which I'd say he did quite well, and Andrew took triple duty as a Spartan, the flashback UNSC command voice, and Carla's neighbor Tom. All of them are great talents, and I hope to work with them again in the future. When I wrote the flashback scene for Zack and Garrett way back before Brotherhood War was anywhere close to being finished, I had originally planned just to have Riley and Hugh do the voices for it. Then while casting extras for Brotherhood War, I came across Silver Runner and noted how much he sounded like a younger Riley. It was uncanny. I had the brilliant idea of casting him as a younger Zack in the flashback. That would make more sense, as during the flashback Zack and Garrett are in their teens instead of being 60 plus years old. Silver eagerly accepted the role. The problem was finding a younger counterpart for Garrett. I had several auditions for the role, but the closest match ended up being Logan Williams. It's not as close of a match as it is with Riley and Silver, but there are points I can totally hear Hugh's Garrett inside Logan's portrayal of young Garrett. And I think that both Silver and Logan did pretty well, especially considering there were some of their first voice acting roles, at least for me. I do have a bit to say about certain returning actors. Nick Johnson worked with me in Brotherhood War mostly as Senator Carlisle, but I cast him in Aftermath as Anthony, Carla's ill-fated husband. He did very well up until the scene where he gets taken. I was looking for a special sort of intensity for that. We did the redos together on a live recording session. I tried a method of directing I'd only read about prior to this. Nick did the line, didn't quite match the intensity I needed. I shouted, "Come on, Nick, more!" And he did it again, more intense, and I kept shouting at him louder and louder, "Come on, Nick! Come on, Nick!" And he'd keep reading the line each time more and more intense until finally, at the point where I didn't think I could push him much more, he nailed the take. Well, that was probably the most fun I've ever had with voice acting. I'm sure Nick would agree. I would also like to notate Catastrophe's extra range this time around. Silva was pretty contained throughout Brotherhood War, but now we see her much more desperate, angry, and scared, and Cat's portrayal of her broadened well to accommodate that. She and Floral did something in Aftermath that I don't think I've had a VA do before. They both cried, convincingly. I find that tears and laughter are the hardest things to fake in voice acting, and, well, they both have the first one mastered. I don't know about the second yet. Their characters didn't have much reason to laugh in Aftermath. There's a reason why Aftermath has the Brotherhood War prefix and the next installment, Hyborian, does not. Aftermath is the true ending to Brotherhood War and sees the hostilities between the UNSC remnants and the Reformation cease, and brings settlement to many of the personal conflicts Brotherhood War set up. Hyborian is going to be all about the war against the Lifebringer, and will bring an end to the story that began back in 2016 when the Lifebringer series aired. It'll be my biggest, most impactful Spartan Legacy story yet, and it's gonna take a while to make. It's probably going to be longer than Brotherhood War, based on the scripts that I've got done so far, and I'm working on introducing a lot more complicated stuff, trying to get the most out of Halo 5 possible. So it's gonna be a minute. Could take another year or more. I'm hoping for the end of 2021, but we'll see. Infinite will probably definitely be out by the time Hyborian's completed, unless it gets delayed, of course. But I promise you, Hyborian will be worth the wait.